So I'm gonna attempt to follow that with the this story that I share. And I think I was inspired, I know I was inspired by Jackie's book to say, okay, I see how this is meant to flow. Oh, I will mention this before I get started. Just so you know what's included with the upgrade. And this is, oh, it should say valued. It's definitely valued at 277. The 30-day premium membership with live transformational sessions weekly starting in July. There's a private clarity call with a practitioner, a frequency assessment with scores, as we talk about the frequency, you'll get one of those, the conscious abundance workbook, and bonus sessions with somatic NLP that we're going to learn about with Julie in a minute. So we are actually going to use Jackie's book to guide some of our experience in that as well. We're going to pull from that. And all right, so let me tell you more about me. So this is the frequency model that I started designing. It was around 2005 that I started to see these parallels in multiple models of change or progression, you could say. And I found the map of consciousness from Dr. Hawkins after I actually had the 7-level models. This is why we're celebrating 7 to some extent, because I was shown that the progression is not just from black to white, not just from dark to light, as in like polarity, or even if you add a gray in there, then you have 3 levels. You've got the good guys and the bad guys and the in-betweeners, the gray. And that's kind of what I knew, like growing up with a religious background, that it was just kind of black and white. And I knew there was also more in my heart. And that was part of my change experience. So I teach a whole, like series. I have a frequency school on this. But today I'm going to mostly just focus on, here we are. If you see the 5 life areas, in the frequency assessment, if you decide you want the full package, we'll get you a frequency score in 5 life areas. There's physical. So that's like your physical health and condition. There is financial. There is psychological, so mental health and well-being. There's social, relationships, family, and there's spiritual. And some of us are going to have strengths in some and less, I guess, development in others. But this 7-level model is based also off of Dr. Hawkins' scale, where 600 equals enlightenment and 200 is average on the planet. 300 to 400 is kind of the average for a well-developed country like America. Okay. So now I'm going to kind of share more on the left. You'll see Dr. Hawkins' map of consciousness is really just emotional, played out in that kind of 100 to 700 model. But if you look at it, look at the negative emotions sitting under 100, right? You got fear, grief, apathy, guilt, shame. Look. And so that's typically, if you're dealing with money and your money energy is tied up with fear, with loss, with I don't care, I can't deal with it, apathy, with guilt, like, oh, I should not have spent that, or with shame, like, I cannot let anybody see the truth. Think about how that's going to lower your frequency with money, right? And any of those the same way. If you're in a relationship, and I really appreciated Jackie sharing vulnerably about hers, her frequency is lower as she kept it a secret, as she like would have been like hiding. And the more aware and the more open we are, the more that can shift as well. So when it's really interesting that the only emotion above 100 is anger at 150. Why would that be? Isn't that interesting? So anger is a catalyst. Anger is where we start getting our power back. And there are a lot of people that will get stuck and stay stuck until they get angry, until things get really real, or they have this moment where they've got to decide, am I going to put up with this or not? And it could be a job that's just really not healthy. So anyway, some of these, oh, I think we missed some things in the middle. Neutrality's in there and there's some 200s, but you get the idea of like you can get up to these, like gratitude is way up there. It's in the 400s, 500s, I believe. So, all right. So we look at, I'm not going to go through all of these obviously, but you can kind of get a feel for like there's a 100 to 600 kind of vibration with all 5 areas. All right. Look at my rock climber. So this is fun. So when you get your vibrational score in these 5 life areas, you kind of, I visualize it like the rock climber. So, and this was kind of, well, it's not exactly me, but you know, I think I've lived here where spiritual has definitely been highest for me. And I put, 490. It's just arbitrary numbers in this model. But when you know your own numbers, you can start to see like, okay, my strongest thing is here. And your mental emotional might be good, almost as high, but then you may not be doing a whole lot for your physical well-being. You're just kind of like holding steady or, doing the basics. And, that's like a 300. Financial 275 is like it needs work. And then the relationship could be the thing that's your lowest foothold, right? So when you look at that and you think what area of your life or what, if you were to look at your finances, and I'd be curious to have people put this in the chat. Is it upper? Is it lower? Is it middle? If you look at just that, because we're going to focus on that today. And I think it's really interesting that Jackie says, if you elevate your financial, frequency, you can elevate everything, especially if that's low, right? The bottom foothold is really the one you have to move first. Isn't that interesting when you look at the rock climber? Because if you try to go higher here, you'll only go so far until you lift that bottom leg. And so if finances are the bottom leg, it's absolutely got to shift. You can move so far without moving your bottom leg, but you'll be stuck until you move in all areas. And so I'm just kind of curious, like, where are people rating themselves? Yes. Because I think, oh, cool, we got some information in there. Financials lowest. Yeah, some people are getting it. Courage is at a 200. Good. Thank you for showing that. And so if you know that's the case, that's where the focus needs to be for sure. Progression means moving forward and upward on the scale of consciousness. So we can move sideways, like she can go sideways, like she can slide over, but you got to go upward too. And so that's, I think, understanding progression involves both. That's a quantum model actually on the left there. It has to do with how creation happens. So whole nother conversation, but it is where change happens. Okay, now I'm going to tell you my story. First of all, we're going to walk through the frequency levels with financial well-being, and I'll tie in kind of where I've been. So the 100 frequency is poverty, homelessness, institutionalized, but also it's an energy, it's a frequency of potentially unethical means to obtaining financial gain. So I'm guessing that's not the case with a lot of people in here. However, if money is tied somehow to something that is limiting freedom in a way like that is low frequency, that's shameful, okay, that will definitely drop it to a 100. So my story is I was actually very average in my household. We were very middle class. My dad was a college professor. And, I remember back when I was growing up, I was the oldest. We had the biggest house on the block because he liked building houses. So he built this really cool house and it had multiple levels and all kinds of stuff. But the clothes I wore to school came in a cardboard box from his professor colleague whose daughter had outgrown them. So I was basically getting literal hand-me-downs. And I would get on the bus and the girl whose clothes I was wearing would get on the bus later. And I would kind of like, shift to the side, like, I hope she doesn't see I'm wearing her clothes. It was awkward, right? And then there was a favorite shirt that I remember I just liked wearing that like every week. And I remember my peers saying, do you not have more shirts than that? And so I think a lot of you can relate. Like sometimes our 100 is back in childhood, the embarrassment or the shame of being called out for not having enough. And that can get stored really deep. That can be stored in our nervous system in ways that will come out later. It can be stored in the limbic brain in ways that can get triggered later. If anyone can relate to that, please, you don't have to share the experience, but like I relate, so I don't feel alone. But that's the kind of thing that I was carrying with me in my lower frequency that I attracted from. And so I ended up attracting my first husband was the things that he owned fit in the back seat of my hatchback. He owned no furniture. He had basically a blow-up bed and a box of clothes. Okay, so we moved in together, and then I started getting all codependent. So this was like right after high school. I'm like, oh well, and here's an interesting thing, and I think it's important to know this. If you look good next to them, you feel better about yourself. I had more than he did. I could be the hero. We're going to talk in a few minutes. Julie Birmingham's going to talk about like hero syndromes, not necessarily healthy. So the thing is, like, I felt like I was doing better just in comparison. The challenge with that is that neither of us were doing well. And so, there were some substance abuse issues in there. I quit. I thought he quit. He didn't quit. It got really messy. There were times that I worried that we wouldn't pay the utility bills. And so I started working 4 part-time jobs just in order for survival mode. So that's kind of what the 100 looks like, is fight, flight, survival mode, embarrassment, and I'll throw this in. Some of that money that we had when we first started out was from drug dealing. So that is definitely 100 frequency financial. I turned my life around. I decided to change, but if you're held down by someone who is still stuck, it's hard to get out. And so that was, next on my list is the 200. And that's not a ton better, but it's better. It's progress. So the 200 frequency is underemployed, dependent on the system. So around that time in my life, I'd done a lot of Al-Anon 12-step programs, and I was angry a lot. And I was trying to, force my way out of my condition. And what I found is that working for part-time jobs was not going to be enough to save the house, kind of thing. And so I did get a bachelor's degree, but I knew I needed a master's degree. And in order for me to move up in my career, I had to leave. I had to get out. And so I remember making the decision to go get my master's and leaving around the same time period. And I knew that it was going to be hard. And so the 200 for me was actually a beginning of faith. I was living on $100 a month in the 90s. It was the $100 my grandmother gave me because she felt so bad for me. So I actually wanted to quit my part-time job. Or no, sorry, I wanted to quit grad school because I couldn't keep my part-time job and do grad school. I was losing it. And I had the 2 kids, single mom. And I just couldn't see a way through. And that's when I got the 2x4 up the head, and the job was taken. And so that's why I had no income, but grad school remained, because my voice to the universe 2 years before that saying, this is how I see myself getting my leg up, I was being held to that. And so job was yanked, grad school was what was left. And I had to trust. I had a lot of little miracles happen actually while I was waiting to get, and one of them was that my internship ended up being with a school district. I was a school psychologist. It ended up being with a school district that paid full salary to the interns. It changed my life. So I just had to get through that for a year. And I was standing in line at the food, whatever, the distribution center. And I actually felt blessed when I was standing in that line. I knew that it was only for a while. And and it was a resource. And so how I respond to that, I didn't respond to it in shame, which is part of how that elevated. I responded to that in gratitude. And so I know that that was part of the elevation that happened. All right, 300 frequency is the experience of basically paycheck to paycheck, security focus. It's also transactional. There's hope, there's acceptance, like this is life. Like we can do this, you know. However, it's not heaven. And so I was working as a school psychologist, and I had it's a great deal because, you know, I had summers off and I got to spend time with my kids. And actually my kids got to go to one of my schools. That was really cool. That was a good year. And so it was nice. And I depended on that. However, I was also in debt. So that's another thing you'll see with the 300 is it's kind of like a mix, right? And so I was, you know, the things that I really wanted to experience, like go on vacation, take the kids to Florida, that all went on the credit card. And then I did life with what I had left. And so the issue with that is that I wasn't really getting anywhere. You know, it was like I was having a decent life, but I was still stuck. And it took what I found actually, and that was a point in time when I started to explore my subconscious beliefs. And what I realized is that I didn't trust money. I looked at money as like this thing that other people had in abundance, but I didn't necessarily trust people with money. So I did a really intensive program. If anybody's heard of Carol Tuttle, she's in our area in Utah. And back in the day, in the early 2000s, she was doing seminars, live in-person experiences. That's where I learned EFT in 2003. I was in her courses, I was tapping, I was listening to her CDs back in the day, and she was teaching how to get out of your own way using this tapping tool and subconscious, you know, work and that type of thing. And what I realized is that this thing with money that wasn't safe for me is that it was attached to ego. It was attached to men. It was attached to narcissism. It was attached to bullies. Okay. And so I had to clear a lot of junk. And I knew I was doing it for a reason. I did not know why. I just got to tell this. I was at a Richard Paul Evans retreat, and I was sharing some of this. And he's one of the first people I met him in 2020 in person. He's the author of, you know, 40 best-selling novels and the Michael Vey series and a bunch of cool things. But when I've known him, I've really connected with him over the last 5 years, 6 years. But what he didn't know in my story is that when I started dating, you know, I was ready, I was divorced. I'd been divorced like 6 years when I felt like God asked the question, would you like to marry for love or for money? And my immediate response is, of course, love. Like that's the why. And the response from God is, but if you married, if you chose money, there's a lot you could do for me, for the world with the money. And so I took a step back and I'm like, okay, I'll do that. I was in-ish. And what happened is I cleared all this stuff with the programs I was using, and I opened up to something very new, and that was a millionaire lifestyle. So the man I started dating had just taken off with a business that he went from a 7-figure to an 8-figure over the next 10 years. It was a lifestyle shifting that was like, he was getting used to it. I was getting used to it with him. However, for me to be there, two things were kind of contingent. One is nothing was in my name. We didn't have a prenuptial, but it was just kind of like my money energy and his money energy had nothing to do with each other. So nothing was in my name. I did have my private practice, and I had an amazing like practice. I was, you know, sharing in the chat, like when I said, okay, I'm going to work Tuesdays and Thursdays, and here's my schedule, it would fill up and it would be 100%. Everyone showed. Like that's really unusual. And so I got really successful with what I was doing. And that was the money I worked with. So it's kind of like in this weird mix. It was kind of like a roller coaster. 400 is kind of like a roller coaster. There's up and down still, and there's emotion still. And so there were times when like I still felt scarcity, and I'd look around me and think like, why would I feel scarcity in this lifestyle? But it was in me, but I had more awareness. And so that was part of my journey. And when I started doing the frequency work, and so I will agree in when, we hear this idea that, having the money frequency raise will raise every other area, because I had basically my full practice salary to work with. Like I didn't help pay for the house or the cars or anything. Like it was all mine. And I used almost all of it to up level my life. I hired coaches. I went on retreats. I decided I was going to write a book. That's a very expensive hobby. So there was a lot of things that I really up leveled, but it's because I had resources. And it was almost like this experience of like God saying, well, what are you going to do with more? And me showing, this is what I'm going to do with more. Like I'm going to impact the world. I'm going to still show up and take care of people. I'm still about the why. And that, in 2017 or 18, I think it was, my time expanded. And I was able to serve on 5 different service positions. I think I was president of the board of an orphanage in Uganda. I went to Uganda to check out the orphanage. We took like multiple 50-pound suitcases. If you've ever done a humanitarian trip, it's quite an adventure. I showed up for my community I created an Emotions Anonymous group, which if you're familiar with 12 step, Emotions Anonymous is a healing journey for emotions. And so I was doing, instructing spiritual, yoga, and I was a cookie mom for the Girl Scouts. Now, if you look at all those things stacked together, I think cookie mom was the hardest. It took so much time and effort. But there were so many things I could do to serve. So that's the 400, is you gotta find the why. I want to hear your why. Okay, put in the chat. If you can feel this, it's like your heart expands with your financial abundance to say, here's what I want to do with my financial abundance. Here's the things that matter. What is your why? If you were to have, $10,000 plop into your bank account, what would you do with that? Okay. So in that marriage, I saw that I had the why. I was pursuing it. It felt important. And then I saw this weird kind of like, how does God work? Because I'm still in scarcity. I'm spending everything I've got on these purposes. And I could see my husband's bank account just like expanding, but he didn't have any projects or purposes or causes that I could see. So it was interesting. And he did not want to get on board with mine. So I'm going to talk about ships in a second. What I realized is I had, and this was at the end of our marriage, we went on a walk, and I walked with him and I said, I am so sorry. I said, I attempted to use your ship, being his, unique wealth, to pull people from the ocean and give them a place to survive. Okay. I am so sorry that I attempted to use you that way. And he was so grateful that I apologized for that. So that's where we start talking about the 500. The 500 is consciousness. It's like, not only do I see this interesting contrast in my life, but it's the awareness of it in a way that there is no judgment. There is no, I'm right, you're wrong. This is the way to do it. Yours isn't. It's humble. It's service oriented, but there's a sense of like a constant. So it's not a roller coaster. The constant comes from faith. Let's sit with that for 10 seconds. Can you just feel into that constant? What I knew is that I did not need to depend on his ship. That within a month, I was connected to a visionary who had left major corporate job, had lots of money in the bank, and was going to use it for good. And he was building a ship. And his goal was literally, I mean, like he described this, was to pull 1,000,000 souls, I think he said 10 million, from the ocean and give them a home where their mental health would be secure. Okay, so he wanted to see massive change in the mental health world. I aligned with that ship and I stayed connected to that ship until I could see that we were going in different directions. But that's what I learned at the 500 is you start aligning yourself with the solution. You don't worry about the problem. And okay, let me pull my slide up and see what else I've got in there. Oh, but okay, cool. There's some good chats. The challenge with getting to 500 is that you've got to let go of security. So sometimes, so when I went into private practice, I didn't know. And I think Jackie's story was perfect on that too. It's like, what am I doing? Nobody knows me now, you know? So you let go of the old ways as you journey this way. But 400 is meaningful work, progression focused. And 500 is this abundance mindset, unlimited by the box. And in my case, unlimited by the ship. So 500 is amazing. When you can get to this level, it is, if it's in your relationships, is that you have this very conscious relationship. You don't have arguments and, you know, this hot cold thing going on. It's like there's a steady consistency. Okay. And so it's a place to get to. When people get there, they have mastery. They have mastered themselves and they become teachers quite often and say, teach other people how to create that same mastery. They may write books. They may be on stage. They may lead an organization. So 500 is strong conscious leadership. Now, if that's all you got to, that is heaven. I'm going to tell you, it is heaven. If you can be in that area in all 5 areas of your life, can you imagine how that would shift? I love I did this. I totally filled out my wheel. That was so cool. And it's really similar if you were to do the frequency scale that way and look at where's your frequency in these 5 life areas and what one thing could you do, to borrow from Jackie, that would elevate your frequency in your lowest area. And so the trick is looking at 500 being the goal. You know, what would it take to get there in different life areas? So that's a lot of times people will go into an alternative solution outside the box. Key thing right there, outside the box. Because outside the box is where you find things that are not mainstream. All right. So in health care, we have alternative health, right? And in mental health, I'm attempting to create more of an alternative mental health model where you don't have to depend on your insurance and the box education that most master's level clinicians have. There are higher solutions for mental health and especially chronic issues. So the 500, and we're going to get into this in just a second, there is an actual alternative finance world that's especially emerging with some really cool things that are going on. All right, so we're gonna talk a little bit about that. So with the 600, you guys curious about the 600? I want to see some of the missions though, because when I go to the 600, I'm gonna go back and look at that. This is where if you've got a mission, you want to find a 600, I would say, guide post, because it will take a higher level. I tend to see things in 200 frequency ranges. So if you're at a 400 and you want to see things move, find a 600 to at least look to. And that might not be somebody that you can interact with in person. It might be a spiritual type point out there, or it could be a mentor. It could be someone who's there. Typically, someone at a 600 frequency has a massive following or is visible to many. In some cases, they were like the monk on the mountaintop that people had to go to them, but the whole village was impacted by that frequency. And they're masters of attraction. They have a manifestation mindset. And so you see miraculous things happen at a 600. The thing that I have done consistently is I've been a student of A Course in Miracles. And I would say this is my 600 guide point that I look to. So when I'm starting to get lost or ego shows up, because ego can be bigger or small and get to you either way, it's how I clear that and remember source and connect. And so that has been my journey in looking at how do I accomplish this thing that seems impossible. And, to make a big difference is not easy. I mean, it doesn't happen every day. And so I'm going to kind of look at, Karen wants to create affordable services for others in ways that offer more for less. That's really cool. And leaving a legacy for children. These are starting to kind of look at the 600 if, like it goes outside that typical story. Supporting children that have been abused, survivors, raise their vibrations, to break chains. That's where, Melody, you've got to find the 600, because what'll happen is if we reach out to try to make change happen. So imagine back on the ocean and the ship, right? So if we're pulling too much lower frequency energy up to try to shift that, it can pull us down. And that's where I've had to do a ton of work on codependency. Because when you start to get to these 500 and 600 levels, you've got to do a lot of work on your hero archetype and your ego, because it's you have to let go of that to find true, like, the power of your source, I think, in accomplishing the good. And make sure that your why isn't tied to a trauma bond, right? So, or isn't affected. It can be that your life experience is your why, but the energy attached to that is important to heal. So those are some of the things that happen at 600 is you start to see miraculous things happen, healing happens, stuff that you can't explain based on cause and effect. And the expansion of things becomes exponential sometimes. Okay. There's a different math once you get to 600. 700 is a realm I have not explored a ton. It's conceptual for me, but I'm starting to see it conceptually happen. Resources are a catalyst for social change at 700. So this is where what you use your money for can literally create a global shift, or the vehicle that you're working with is globally shifting. This is where you establish a higher economy. So it's like stepping out of the typical system completely, but not just to get out of it, to create something that works even better. To me, that's mind-blowing. Does anybody else have their mind blown with that concept? I'm going to actually share a real thing that's going on with that. All right. So in my book, Being at Zero, I talk about the idea of the water walkers. So this is what's mind-blowing. Ships, we can wrap our minds around the ships. What is harder to wrap our minds around is the water walkers. So I tell about that more in here. I won't go into a lot of depth, but you get the idea. It's like the level of faith that creates something that hasn't been done before, you don't see. And this is my honey. We are on a ship. There's the book. And it's the story of how so when I was at Richard Paul Evans' retreat, we kind of nicknamed it How to Divorce a Millionaire. And so he and I were divorced in 2022, and I met Todd, and I talk about this metaphor in regards to him. And he's gotten me to think in new paradigms. because he is visionary. And one of the things that we did, we created what's called Spreading Hope, which is the name of our subscription in a company that is a software subscription. It includes AI-informed trade returns and e-token. Okay, these are things you probably haven't heard of. But the vision behind this company was to generate 1,000 millionaires with social causes. What I understand is that the founders, they founded this about 3 years ago, and it's international, that they attempted to use what they found. It was basically an AI generated money machine, more or less. And they were going to just use it to take care of what they could, create charities and do good. And they realized they could never make a dent the way that if they were to create more people using this system could. And so that is what inspired me to be involved. The millionaire status is achievable in 1 year. I know personally 5 or 6 people who have done that in 1 year, and they did not start with a lot. It's a very supportive community. There's a team culture. It's an international organization. It's been in the US for about 18 months. It involves direct sales compensation with a matrix bonus. And so this is what is generating the revenue so that I can continue to do things like seminars and write books and run a membership community with a spiritual focus. This is what's running this. Okay, so let me share with you just a little comparison with this in a 2-week period this year. And I have funds in, oh dear, those numbers are not, oh no, these are all $250,000 accounts. Okay, so I was able to be set up for passive income and to live off of passive income as long as the stock market looks good, right? So that's not something I can depend on. The stock market, I don't know if I'd put them in 500 frequency. It is so up and down. I'd put it in 400. Okay, so in the first 2 weeks of April, my ambassador account and I did say it's a socially conscious fund with my S&P 500, lost $12,000. My hedge fund, which is a managed portfolio that you have to have so much to get into, lost $10,000. My money market that most people are familiar with, your savings, made $250. My WFAM account made $13,000. That's what I lived on. Okay. So this is consistent. This is definitely 500 frequency, and the vision of it is even higher. So I'm going to share who it's not for, and then I'm going to give you there's a couple of people here who can share a little bit about their experience with it. Actually, I'm going to let you do that right now. Then I'm going to come back. So Jason has been in this community and a subscriber for 3 or 4 months, I believe. And tell me just a little bit about your experience with it and the why behind it.
Well, first of all, I had a similar experience with 2x4 hitting me. I got hit with a $110,000 tax bill. I lost my job. My truck broke down. I drove.
All recently, right?
Yeah. I got the tax bill in October. I lost my job in February. And interestingly enough, listening to Jackie, I really enjoyed that because, I relate to money differently now, but it really came through relating to my own self, or relating to money differently by being in tune with my inner landscape, like she said. So to me, abundance is so much more than money. So what's transformed for me is, I have time, I have freedom. So those are all aspects of abundance to me. And she mentioned how you relate to others. So there's really only 2 energies. There's flow and there's contraction or restriction. And when I started to realize that and relate to it, so I had that tax bill and I looked at it like I was going to go to work every day for 2.5 years at the money that I was making. And I just sat down and cried one day. And after 2 weeks of going to work, I thought, I can't go to work this disempowered, feeling like it's a prison sentence. And so I detached from that. And I think that's kind of what Jackie described. I think that's kind of where things hit you. But I drove to the meeting on the back of a motorcycle in March in a Utah cold. And, I can say that, in 3 months, I'm making more in a month than I made in a year.
It's passive income. And that's what is really cool about it. And you can decide if you want to share it or not. It's the engine works either way. And so I think that what I see with this is it's for the right people. It is based on sharing it with people. It's a relationship marketing model. So you're not going to see anything online that's accurate about it. There is a link tree, but when I went on there, I'm like, oh my gosh, they're trying to clone the golden goose and they can't. So there's like a whole bunch of link trees now that aren't accurate. So it really just, it involves a conversation with people who are involved is what it involves. And it's kind of like there's a little bit of a gateway there. It's like we want to bring this to people we know, like, and trust. And so if you're interested in learning more, I'm going to have Joanne put 2 links in here. One for being at zero, because that's fun to have. And then the other for our, just to get into a meeting. There it is. Yeah. So WFAM is the organization that was started by Carlos. So Carlos isn't here today, but Jason's covering and sharing kind of his experience with this. But the vision of this is that with the e-token system, that they could actually create like an international Amazon that allows people to exchange, like a whole nother economy is basically what this is. And that we're, I used the example earlier today in one of our meetings. I said, it's kind of like you're picturing that new order, and I think I came from Orderville because that's where Richard Paul Evans's ranch was. And I think that was the community that they tried to do, like everybody everybody pool their resources, and then we're going to divide it evenly among all the people. And it was kind of this, you get 2 pairs of Levi's kind of lifestyle. And so it's like, if you're combining and pooling resources that aren't super abundant, it's not really a win. But if you're looking at 1,000 millionaires pooling their resources, that's a game changer. That is a game changer. That's an opportunity for social change, bringing the right people in. And that's why I'm like, it's important to me that we're steering this in a way that is conscious. And so it's part of the reason I'm doing this today. But okay, I'm going to share who this is for and who this is not for. So go ahead and sign up. If you're interested, we'll do a live meeting and explain more about it. But this is not for people who go to the professional before they make a move. So, the analogy would be going to the doctor to bring in all your supplements and homeopathics to say, should I take these? The doctor's not educated in that. And so when I shared this, I shared it with my annuity guy thinking, oh, he's going to love this. Oh no, he tore it down. So that's not what it's for. It's not for those who are locked into typical retirement plans like annuities. I actually still sold my annuity. I'm like, well, dude, I'm still like doing it. And he's like, okay. But those whose nervous systems aren't wired for exponential returns. Like if you're like safe with little incremental improvements, this may not be for you. But we can also work with your nervous system. So there we go. It's those who are not at a 400, 500 frequency in other life areas. Like if you're still stuck somewhere, one thing I've learned is that money is an amplifier. So things in your relationship are not right or other areas, you want to make sure that you do what you can to clear that before you really start going expansive, okay? Because you don't want to expand a mess. One of those things that Todd and I had to work through when we got married is when I gave him that assignment, like, what would you do with $10,000? All of it went to his kids. And we've had to work through that because as he's had more resources, more has gone to them. The problem has not gotten better. So look at that. Okay. Those who go straight to debunking and take advice from 60-second experts. So that's where, you look at somebody who's taken 60 seconds to look at it and they give you advice on it. Like, that's probably not the right approach. Okay. Who this is for is, see if it clicks. There we go. Those who are ready for truly passive income with their own diversification. So you saw my diversification. I have a diversified portfolio. That's just part of it. I have also bought mortgages. I've also funded acquisitions. Okay, so this is my fun world. And I have to make really strong decisions in all those cases, but I'm not putting all of my resources in one place. Okay, those with a network of qualified individuals that people who could invest. And this is about a 5-figure to 6-figure investment. And we don't call it investment, it's a purchase because you're actually purchasing a product. Those who are comfortable with alternative health or alternative finance, those with a social mission ready for the revenue to fund it. And that's exciting. That is exciting. Those who have already moved beyond the current paradigms of old school growth and compensation. So if you look at the last 20 years have shown us something that's never been seen before. And that is the first, 100, like the 1900s were the model of growth that looked like this. And that's what built the stock market, is that there was enough companies growing that they were able to find the top 500 companies and trust that they were going to continue to grow. What they didn't see were the companies that came around 2000 that did this, okay, that did this. And it was like an upward turn that people are like, I don't know where to trust that. That's what you see with Bitcoin. That's what you see with Airbnb. That's what you saw with Amazon. So there are things that became household names within like less than 5 years, right? That's new. That didn't happen in the 1900s. So this is one of those things. And those who are like ready for it will kind of feel that. And it's a feel into it. And if you feel into it, it's powerful. Okay. So let me share okay, so there's the link. I think it's in the chat. And we typically meet on Wednesdays. We may not do an evening as often. We're doing some switching in how we're going to do July. So get in and know that there's different times, and there's also opportunities to do one-on-ones if we want that option. So, okay. Now, I'm going to let you sit with that for a moment. I am going to give away a copy of Being at Zero. Okay. So while you're looking at that, I'm going to pull up the chat. Okay. And it's also this link is in the chat. So any questions, throw them in the chat if you're like, what's going on? Okay. So it's a lot to process the proposition, and you may need more than one exposure to it to understand all the workings. It's a pretty fancy machine. I'll just tell you that. Okay. So the copy of the book is, you can, if you want to order a copy, you can. And okay, I'm just going to close my eyes and point my cursor, and I'm on Carolyn Bushman. There we go. Carolyn Bushman is the winner of Being at Zero. And I clicked on people that had already won, so I had to move. She's the first one that hadn't won. Thank you, winners, for still contributing. We know that you're really committed. That's awesome. So Carolyn Bushman, will you also send Joanne your address? And let's just sit with this. So I want to invite you to just do, and we do in our meditation groups, and I'll share that again. But in our meditation groups, we meditate on social causes is what we do. And we do that in silence and stillness and through connection. And so just for a moment, I want you to just sit with this idea of like that social cause, and it might be a family cause. It might be you just really need a break and, to get out from under your mortgage or your debt. And there might be something here that could give you a level of freedom that isn't like cause and effect, that isn't like it's going to take 10 years, that takes you in that 600 frequency to the instant miracle. And so I want you to just imagine that as you kind of sit with like, what would that feel like? Oh, actually, we're going to let Julie follow me, and she's going to do some NLP stuff, but I'm going to do one with you just real quick. I want you to stand up and stand in your current situation that you would like to change, okay? That you feel like this is hard, this is, even though it's good, it could be better. And feel the energy of that. All right. And then typically in front of you, I want you to, in your mind, create the circle on the ground in front of you that holds the solution, that holds the higher frequency. And imagine what that entails as far as like, not the how to get there, but just once you're there, what's different. Okay. And when you're ready, you step into it. Okay. Just take that step forward and be in that new energy. Breathe it in. Feel it starting at your toes, working its way up. And feel deserving of it, because that is a birthright of sorts. That is, we are meant to be abundant.